There's a particular kind of devastation that happens to a narcissist after they betray a super empath. And what most people don't understand is that this isn't about karma or justice or some cosmic balancing of scales. This is about something far more psychologically catastrophic. The narcissist loses access to a type of nourishment they didn't even know they were dependent on until it was gone. And once it's gone, they spend the rest of their life searching for something they can never find again because they destroyed the only source that ever existed. Let me take you inside what actually happens in the narcissist psyche when this loss occurs, because it's far more complex and far more permanent than most people realize. The narcissist's entire psychological system operates on what we call supply, but not all supply functions the same way in their internal economy. Think of it like nutrition. You can consume empty calories all day long, feel temporarily full, but your body remains fundamentally malnourished. Most people the narcissist encounters offer exactly this kind of supply: surface admiration, status validation, transactional appreciation. It fills space, but it doesn't actually feed anything real. The narcissist consumes it, feels a brief surge, and then immediately needs more because it's not touching the deeper hunger. It's not addressing the fundamental void. Then they encounter the super empath, and everything changes. Because what the super empath offers isn't just superior quality supply, it's an entirely different category of psychological nourishment. The super empath does something that terrifies and intoxicates the narcissist in equal measure. They see through the performance. They perceive the wound underneath the grandiosity. They recognize the terrified, fractured self that the narcissist has built their entire existence around, hiding. And here's the part that creates the addiction. The super empath sees all of this, understands all of this, and still chooses to stay, still offers compassion, still believes in the narcissist's capacity for something more. For the narcissist, this creates an experience they've probably never had before. Validation that feels real because it's coming from someone with actual depth, someone who can't be easily fooled, someone whose perception the narcissist actually respects because they recognize on some level that this person sees clearly. Most people reflect back the narcissist's carefully constructed image. The super empath reflects back something deeper. They see both the defended false self and the hidden true self simultaneously, and they respond to both with a kind of radical acceptance that the narcissist has never experienced. This isn't just supply, this is recognition, this is being known. And for someone whose entire psychological architecture is built on never being truly known, this is both the most dangerous and the most necessary thing they've ever encountered. The super empath also brings something else into the narcissist's life that becomes essential: intellectual and emotional depth that actually engages them. Unlike typical supply sources who are easier to manipulate because they're operating at a more superficial level, the super empath can match the narcissist's intelligence, can hold complex emotional paradoxes, can engage in conversations that feel substantive rather than performative. The narcissist becomes dependent on this quality of interaction in a way that's fundamentally different from their addiction to regular supply. It's not just about maintaining their grandiose self-image. It's about experiencing something that approximates authentic connection, even if they can never fully participate in it reciprocally. Think about what this means. The narcissist spends their entire life feeling fundamentally alone, surrounded by people but never truly met. Then the super empath arrives, and suddenly there's someone who can actually see them, who can hold space for their complexity, who makes them feel less like a performance and more like a person. This becomes the narcissist's most crucial, not because it validates their grandiosity, but because it makes them feel real. But here's where the pathology creates an impossible situation. The narcissist cannot metabolize this kind of connection. in a healthy way. They cannot integrate it, cannot build on it, cannot allow it to transform them. Instead, they consume it. They draw from the super empath's depth, using it to feel momentarily whole, but they cannot give back in kind because they don't have access to their own emotional depths. They're drawing from a well they have no ability to replenish. This creates an unsustainable dynamic that can only end one way. And this is where the betrayal becomes not just likely, but inevitable. The narcissist disorder will eventually compel them to devalue and destroy the very thing they're most dependent on. Perhaps because the intimacy becomes too threatening, perhaps because the super empath starts requiring reciprocity, perhaps because the narcissist's shame at being truly known becomes unbearable. Perhaps it's just a natural trajectory of their pathology playing out. Whatever the specific trigger, the narcissist does what their disorder compels them to do. They betray, they devalue, they destroy, and then they experience a loss that will haunt them for the rest of their life. Because what they discover in the aftermath is something that fundamentally alters their psychological landscape. This particular quality of supply, this depth of recognition, this experience of being truly seen and accepted, anyway, it cannot be replaced. The narcissist might find other sources of validation. They might manipulate new people. They might dominate new relationships, but they will never again encounter someone with that specific combination of depth, perception, resilience, and genuine care. They will never again experience being known that completely and accepted. They will never again have access to that quality of connection, that level of stimulation, that feeling of being real rather than performing. They've destroyed something irreplaceable. And on whatever level they're capable of knowing anything real about themselves, they know it. Every subsequent relationship becomes a disappointing echo of what they had and destroyed. Every new source of supply feels shallow by comparison, like drinking from a puddle after you've tasted pure spring water. The narcissist finds themselves in a peculiar kind of hell, trying to satisfy a hunger that only one specific type of nourishment could address, and they've permanently severed their access to it. You cannot replace someone who saw you completely and still chose to love you, especially after you've proven them right to leave. But the loss of supply, as devastating as it is, actually points to something even more psychologically catastrophic for the narcissist. Because what the super empath truly represented was the one thing the narcissist has organized their entire existence around: avoiding, being fully known. Let me take you deeper into what this means. The narcissist's entire psychological architecture is essentially an elaborate defense system constructed to protect against a core wound, a profound sense of defectiveness, shame, or worthlessness that formed early in their development, probably before they even had language to understand what was happening to them. Everything about the narcissistic presentation, the grandiosity, the superiority complex, the need for absolute control, the apparent lack of empathy, these aren't personality traits in any authentic sense. These are armor. These are walls. These are carefully constructed fortifications built to ensure that no one ever gets close enough to see what the narcissist believes in their most hidden depths is their fundamentally unlovable true self. And this defense system works reasonably well with most people. The narcissist maintains the facade. They keep people at exactly the right distance, where those people provide validation without penetration, admiration without actual intimacy. Most people in a narcissist's life never see past the mask because the narcissist never allows them close enough, or because those people simply don't have the perceptual capacity to see through the construction, even if they wanted to. But the super empath is categorically different. The super empath possesses this almost supernatural ability to perceive what's happening beneath the surface. They can sense the wound underneath the grandiosity. They can feel the terror underneath the rage. They can detect the fragility underneath the apparent invulnerability. And critically, they can hold all of this in their awareness simultaneously without being manipulated by the false self or destroyed by the narcissist's defensive maneuvers. This means that for perhaps the first time in the narcissist's adult life, they're in a relationship with someone who actually knows them, not the performed self, not the curated image, not the strategic presentation, but the actual fractured, terrified, shame-bound person underneath all the layers of defense. And here's the paradox that creates an unbearable tension in the narcissist's psyche. Part of them desperately craves this. Part of them is starving for the experience of being truly seen and accepted. Anyway, this is the unconscious fantasy that drives their initial pursuit of the super empath. The hope that maybe finally someone can see all the way down and not abandon them. But another part of them, the part organized entirely around psychological survival, finds this level of exposure absolutely intolerable, because being fully known means being fully vulnerable. And vulnerability for the narcissist isn't just uncomfortable, it's existentially threatening. So throughout the entire relationship, the narcissist exists in this excruciating double bind. The super empath's perception of their true self is simultaneously the thing they want most and the thing they fear most. It's both the deepest connection they've ever experienced and the most threatening exposure they've ever endured. When the relationship ends, when the narcissist inevitably betrays this person and drives them away through their own pathological behavior, something irreversible happens to the narcissist's entire defensive structure. Because now they have to live with knowledge that fundamentally destabilizes everything they've built. Someone saw through all of it, all the way down to the core. And that person, with full information, with complete understanding, ultimately chose to leave anyway. This is fundamentally, categorically different from other relationship endings the narcissist has experienced. When a typical supply source leaves, the narcissist can construct a comfortable narrative around it. They couldn't handle my intensity. They didn't understand my complexity. They weren't operating at my level. They left the performance, but they never really knew the person behind it. This narrative allows the narcissist to keep their defensive system intact. The armor wasn't penetrated. The walls weren't breached. The core self remains hidden and therefore protected. But with the super empath, this story completely falls. LS apart. The narcissist cannot deny that they were known, cannot pretend the super empath just didn't understand them, cannot hide behind the excuse that the super empath only saw the surface and got scared. The super empath saw everything, the wound, the defense mechanisms, the patterns, the pathology, the terrified child hiding inside the grandiose adult. And the super empath didn't leave from ignorance or inability to handle complexity. They left from clarity. They left from understanding. They left not because they couldn't see who the narcissist really was, but precisely because they could. This completely destabilizes the narcissist's core defensive structure in a way that can never be fully repaired. Because if someone can see you that completely, understand you that deeply, and still conclude that you're not worth staying for, what does that say about what they saw? If the one person who perceived you most accurately, who understood your wounds and your defenses and your patterns, ultimately decided that the reality of who you are wasn't enough to stay for, how do you defend against the implication? How do you avoid the conclusion that maybe the shameful, defective self you've been hiding your entire life really is the truth of who you are? The narcissist cannot recover from this because it's not just a loss. It's a confirmation of their deepest fear. It's evidence that being truly known leads inevitably to abandonment. It validates the very thing they organized their entire psychological structure to prevent. Section 3, and worse, they cannot unknow that they've been known. They cannot rebuild the wall that's been permanently breached. Every future relationship becomes haunted by this experience. The narcissist now knows what it feels like to be truly seen, which means they know what they're hiding from everyone else. They know the difference between someone who's fooled by the mask and someone who sees through it. And they know that the one person who saw through it completely, who had full access to who they actually are underneath everything, made a conscious choice to leave. This creates a kind of psychological scar tissue that never fully heals. The narcissist might find new supply. They might construct new relationships. They might even convince themselves on a surface level that they've moved on to bigger and better things. But there's always this awareness, often buried in the unconscious, but nevertheless present, that they were once fully known and fully rejected, that someone had complete access to their authentic self and decided that wasn't enough, that the reality of who they are, when clearly perceived, wasn't worth staying for. And perhaps most painfully, the narcissist knows, even if they can never consciously admit it, that the super empath's departure wasn't cruel or vindictive or irrational. It wasn't the empath failing to understand. It wasn't the empath being unable to handle the narcissist's complexity. It was simply the natural consequence of the narcissist's own actions. The empath didn't leave because they misunderstood. They left because they understood completely and chose self-preservation over self-destruction. The narcissist cannot rebuild what the super empath's knowledge dismantled. The comforting illusion that remaining unknown keeps them safe. Now let's examine what happens in the practical, day-to-day reality of the narcissist's life after the super empath leaves. Because beyond the psychological devastation of being known and abandoned, there's something more immediate and visceral that the narcissist must face. The one thing they've spent their entire existence structuring their life to avoid: themselves. The super empath wasn't just providing validation or even deep recognition. They were ioning as what we might call an emotional regulator for the narcissist's internal chaos. And I need to be precise about what I mean here, because it's not the same thing as codependency or enabling, though it can superficially resemble those dynamics. The narcissist's internal world is fundamentally dysregulated, without a coherent sense of self, without access to genuine self-worth, without the capacity for self-soothing or emotional integration. The narcissist exists in a state of chronic inner instability. They're constantly oscillating between grandiosity and collapse, between rage and emptiness, between the terror of being nothing and the exhausting performance of being everything. Their emotional state is never stable, never grounded, never genuinely peaceful. Most people in the narcissist's orbit cannot handle this level of internal chaos. They're either completely deceived by the grandiose presentation and never see the instability underneath, or they quickly become overwhelmed by the emotional volatility and retreat to protect themselves. But the super empath has this extraordinary and ultimately self-destructive capacity to remain stable in the face of the narcissist's instability, to hold space for their contradictions, to stay calm when they're raging, to provide grounding when they're spiraling, to offer Over time, the narcissist becomes profoundly dependent on this regulatory function in ways they don't even consciously recognize. The super empath becomes the container for feelings the narcissist cannot process, the anchor when their sense of self starts to fragment, the mirror that reflects back a coherent identity when their own threatens to dissolve into chaos. And because the super empath performs this function so consistently and so skillfully, the narcissist doesn't even realize it's happening. They just know that somehow In this person's presence, they feel more real, more stable, more whole than they do anywhere else in their life. Then the super empath leaves, and suddenly, catastrophically, that entire regulatory function disappears. Now the narcissist is alone with the full force of their internal chaos. All the feelings they never learned to process are still there. All the self-fragmentation they never learned to integrate is still there. All the emptiness they never learned to fill from within is still there. But now there's no one to help them manage it, no one to absorb their rage without retaliating, no one to witness their vulnerability without weaponizing it, no one to reflect back a coherent self when they're fracturing. This is different from missing someone in the normal sense. This is different from grief over a lost relationship. This is the experience of losing a crucial part of your own psychological functioning, like losing an external organ you didn't know you were dependent on until it was suddenly removed. And here's what makes this so particularly devastating for the narcissist. They cannot articulate what they've lost. They don't have the emotional vocabulary or the self-awareness to understand and express what's actually happened. They can't say, I depended on this person to regulate my nervous system, to contain my projections, to stabilize my fragmented sense of self. Instead, they just experience a void, an unbearable, gnawing absence that nothing seems to fill no matter what they try. So they try to fill it. They pursue new supply. They construct new relationships. They seek new sources of validation. But here's the fundamental problem they cannot solve. No one else has the super empath's unique combination of depth, resilience, perceptiveness, and tolerance. No one else can perform that regulatory function at the same level because it requires a rare configuration of qualities. The new supply might be attractive or successful or even kind in conventional ways, but they lack the emotional sophistication to hold the narcissist's complexity. They're either too shallow to perceive what the narcissist actually needs beneath the surface, or they're too psychologically healthy to provide it, even if they could perceive it. They set boundaries where the super empath had seemingly limitless patience. They retreat where the super empath would have stayed and absorbed. They demand reciprocity where the super empath gave unconditionally, at least for a time. Section 4. And so the void remains. The narcissist keeps searching for what they lost, but they're searching for something that cannot be replicated. They're trying to find someone who will perform the impossible work of making them feel whole the way the super empath did, but that person doesn't exist. Or if they do exist, if there's another super empath out there with that same rare combination of qualities, they've already learned their lesson. They've already discovered what happens when you sacrifice yourself for someone who cannot reciprocate. They're not available for that dynamic anymore. The narcissist begins to realize, on some level, they may never be able to articulate that they're alone with themselves in a way they've never been before. And this aloneness is unbearable precisely because the narcissist's internal world is not a safe place to be. It's a place of shame and emptiness and fragmentation and terror. It's exactly what all the grandiosity and manipulation and control were designed to escape from in the first place. Without the super empath's regulatory presence, the narcissist faces a truth that's almost too painful to bear. They don't actually know how to be with themselves. They've never developed the internal capacity for self-soothing, for self-reflection, for self-compassion. They've outsourced all of that emotional work to other people, and specifically to the one person who could perform it at the level their disorder required. And now that person is gone, not just physically absent, but psychologically unavailable in a permanent way. The super empath has closed the door, set the boundary, reclaimed their energy, built their life around never again being someone else's emotional regulator. They're no longer willing or able to serve that function for the narcissist. And the narcissist is left with the one companion they've spent a lifetime running from. their own unintegrated self. And unlike the super empath, that self offers no comfort, no regulation, no relief, just an echoing emptiness that no amount of new supply can actually fill. Because what's missing isn't external validation. What's missing is the one person who could make the narcissist's internal world feel survivable. But there's one more dimension to this loss that might be the most devastating of all. Something that cuts to the very core of the narcissist's relationship with themselves. Because the super empath wasn't just seeing who the narcissist was, they were seeing who the narcissist could become. And this is crucial to understand because it represents a fundamentally different kind of perception. The super empath's vision wasn't limited to the narcissist's current state, to the pathology and the defenses and the wounded self hiding beneath the grandiosity. The super empath, with their depth and their perhaps overly optimistic faith in human potential, could also perceive something else. The person the narcissist might be if they chose healing over defense. This vision wasn't delusion. It wasn't the fantasy of someone who couldn't see reality clearly. The super empath saw the reality perfectly, saw the pathology and all the damage and all the patterns. They just also saw the potential. They could hold both truths simultaneously without contradiction. This is who you are now, and this is who you could become. And more remarkably, more tragically, they believed in that potential. They believed in it enough to stay far longer than any reasonable person should have stayed. They believed in it enough to endure treatment that violated their own boundaries and self-respect. They believed in the narcissist's capacity for change, even when the narcissist didn't believe in it themselves, even when all the evidence suggested that change was impossible. For the narcissist, this belief represented both their greatest hope and their greatest burden, because part of them desperately wanted to become that better version of themselves that the super empath perceived. Part of them resonated with that vision, felt the pull of possible redemption, glimpsed in rare moments of vulnerability what the super empath saw. A path toward wholeness, toward genuine connection, toward freedom from the prison of their own disorder. But another part of them, the part organized entirely around survival and defense, found this vision absolutely terrifying. Because becoming that person would require exactly what the narcissist's entire psychological structure is designed to prevent. Facing the wound directly, feeling the shame without defending against it, acknowledging the damage they've caused without deflecting responsibility, sitting with the unbearable vulnerability of not knowing who they are without their defenses. So the narcissist remained trapped between these two impossible poles. The desire to become what the super empath believed they could be, and the terror of what that transformation would actually require. And in that trap, they did what their pathology always compels them to do. That AI chose defense over growth. They chose the familiar pain of their disorder over the unknown pain of genuine healing. They chose to protect the false self rather than risk revealing and reconstructing the true self. They betrayed not just the super empath, but the vision the super empath held of their redemptive potential. And when the super empath finally leaves, when they accept with clear eyes that the narcissist is consistently choosing pathology over possibility, defense over development, something irreversible happens in the narcissist's psychological landscape. They don't just lose a person, they lose the last witness to their potential for something better. They lose the only person who could see them at their absolute worst and still maintain genuine faith in their capacity for transformation. And no one else will ever believe in them that way again. Because belief of that depth and quality requires an extraordinarily rare combination. It requires someone who can see through all the defenses without being deceived by them. Someone who can perceive potential without being naive about present reality. Someone whose own character is solid enough to maintain hope in another person's growth, even while that person actively undermines and betrays that hope. The super empath was that impossible combination of clarity and faith, realism and hope, unflinching perception and unwavering compassion. And the narcissist systematically destroyed their belief through 1,000 betrayals, through the consistent choice to protect rather than transform, through the pattern of hurting the one person who genuinely believed in their healing. When the super empath finally withdraws that belief, they take with them the narcissist's last connection to their own possibility. Because everyone else in the narcissist's life either believes in the grandiose false self, which isn't real, or C, yes, only the pathology which offers no hope for redemption. The super empath was the only one who could hold both truths. I see exactly who you are, and I see exactly who you could become, and I believe you're capable of bridging that gap. After they leave, the narcissist is haunted by something worse than loss. They're haunted by foreclosed possibility, by the person they could have been if they'd had the courage to meet the super empath's belief with action, to match faith with effort, to choose transformation over defense. That ghost follows them into every future relationship, every new beginning, every moment when they might choose differently but don't, because now they know what was possible. They've seen themselves through eyes that perceive their potential, and they've chosen again and again to remain exactly who they are rather than become who they could be. When you destroy the faith of the only person who saw both your reality and your possibility, you lose more than their presence. You lose your own future.